Have you ever wondered how JavaScript operates behind the scenes? Today, we will discuss the workings of JavaScript and understand concepts like execution context and the call stack. When a JavaScript initially starts running, the global execution context is created, it representing the global scope. The global execution context has many components. Below are some important components. A variable environment records. The variable environment is a part of the execution context that stores variables declared with var and function declarations. Each execution context, whether global or within a function, has its own variable environment record. Declarative environment records. These records are used to store variables declared with let, const, or class declarations. Every execution context goes through two phases: creation phase and execution phase. Creation phase. This initial phase involves setting up the environment for the script. In creation phase, the memory space is set up for the variable and function. The creation phase occurs in three stages. 1. Creation of the variable object. This stores variables and function declarations within the execution context. Function declarations are hoisted, while variables declared with var are hoisted and initialized to undefined. 2. Creation of the scope. Chain. This manages lexical scoping, ensuring access to variables and functions from the current and outer scopes. 3. Setting the value of the this keyword. The this is assigned based on the execution context, referring to the global object in the global context, and depending on function invocation in local contexts. Execution phase. The execution phase in which the execution context is pushed on the call stack and the code is executed. The JavaScript engine executes the code within the execution context. It reads and processes statements, evaluates expressions, and performs any necessary function calls. Let's take an example and see what happens behind the scenes whenever we run this script. As we have seen, every execution context goes through two phases: creation phase and execution phase. Let's start with creation phase. In the creation phase, top to bottom, it first encounters the variable y, and this variable is declared using let, so it will be stored in the declarative environment record associated with the global execution context. Variables created with the const and let keywords are uninitialized during hoisting, meaning they have memory allocated but no value assigned. They are initialized only during the execution phase of the context when their values are assigned. The declared is also called the temporal dead zone. On the second line, x equals 5, this variable is declared using var, so it will be stored in the variable environment record associated with the global execution context with the value of undefined. On the third line, z equals 10, this variable is declared using const, so it will be stored in the declarative environment record associated with the global execution context. On the next line, we have the function getSum. The getSum function is declared in the global scope, so it will be stored in the variable environment record associated with the global execution context. On the last line, sum equals z plus getSum xy. This variable is declared using var, so it will be stored in the variable environment record associated with the global execution context with the value of undefined. There are no other variables or function declarations here, so we move on to the next phase, the execution phase. The JavaScript engine starts executing the code from top to bottom. This involves running the functions. evaluating expressions, and executing statements. Variables that were hoisted and initialized to undefined during the creation phase are now assigned their actual values. Now the global execution context is pushed to the call stack and start execution of code. On the first line, we have the y variable. So now this variable gets initialized with the value 5. On the second line, we have the x variable. So now this variable gets initialized with the value 5. On the third line, we have the z's variable. So now this variable gets initialized with the value 10. Then we have the getSum function, but this is already initialized in memory, so nothing gets done here. On the last line, we invoke getSum function, so the call method of the function object is called, and this in turn creates a new function execution context. Again, this execution context goes through two phases, the creation phase and the execution phase. The outer environment points to the global environment record. Here we handle function parameters. So in this instance, _x and _win are immediately added to the function environment record and immediately initialized with the values 5 and 5, respectively. The variable sans with the br keyword is added to the function environment and initialized, but with the value of undefined. Now that memory has been allocated for the parameters and variables, it's time for the execution phase, so the function execution context is added onto the call stack. Here, the answer is the sum of 5 and 5, which equals 10, and on's variable gets initialized with the value 10. On last line of function, it returns the value 10. When the function completes its execution and returns, its execution context is removed from the call stack. The topmost execution context then reverts to the currently active one, which is global context. In the end, the value of zo, 10, is combined with the return value of the getSum function, 10, resulting in a total of 20 assigned to the variable sum. With no further tasks remaining in our script, the global execution context is also popped off the call stack, signifying the completion of our script.